Kalen's boots sank into the soft, wet soil of the alien forest as he trudged through the dense undergrowth. The air was thick with moisture, and the distant sound of alien wildlife echoed in the background, creating a strange, almost haunting, melody. He wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted the weight of his rifle on his back. The planet, Varelli's, was beautiful. But it was also wild. His team had landed weeks ago, tasked with patrolling the area and ensuring that no one ventured too deep into the uncharted forests. The Vulpine, the planet's native species, were known to inhabit these forests. Kalen had heard rumors about them, tall, fox-like beings with sharp eyes and quick reflexes. The general consensus among his fellow soldiers was that the Vulpine were dangerous. Some even called them predators, always watching, always hunting. But Kalen wasn't so sure. The stories were vague, and none of them had actually encountered a Vulpine. It was all based on hearsay and old accounts. Kalen's mission for the day was simple: patrol the eastern sector of the forest, take note of any unusual activity, and report back to the base. He wasn't expecting much, maybe a few animals or signs of other human explorers. What he didn't expect was to encounter a Vulpine. His team had spread out, and Kalen had been walking for hours, making his way along the narrow path that twisted through the thick trees. The deeper he went, the more alien the world became. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting into strange shapes. Giant flowers with colors he had never seen before bloomed, and their sweet, thick fragrance made him dizzy. Yet it was peaceful. Too peaceful. Too still. That's when he heard it. A rustle in the bushes. His instincts kicked in immediately. His hand reached for the rifle on his back, and his heart skipped a beat. The rustling grew louder, and Kalen's muscles tensed. Whatever it was big. A large animal, maybe a Vulpine. His mind raced through the stories he had heard. A predator. A hunter, he whispered to himself, tightening his grip on the weapon. Then, suddenly, the rustling stopped. The silence that followed felt thick, almost suffocating. Kalen held his breath, trying to listen for any movement. The air seemed to shift, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He slowly turned his head, scanning the area. A figure appeared from behind the trees. At first glance, Kalen froze. It was taller than him, at least 6 feet. Its body was sleek and covered in fur, its legs powerful and lean. The creature moved, with a fluid grace stepping softly through the foliage. Its amber eyes locked onto Kalen with an intensity that made his stomach churn. The fox-like face, framed by sharp ears, tilted to one side as it observed him. Its long tail swayed gently behind it, almost like it was sizing him up. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Kalen's heart pounded in his chest. What the hell is that, he thought. He had been told the Vulpine were intelligent, but this was different. This wasn't just some wild animal. This was a creature with purpose. His mind raced, and the fear began to seep in. He raised his rifle slightly, his finger brushing against the trigger. The creature's eyes didn't leave him. Kalen's breath quickened, and his instincts told him to be ready. Every muscle in his body was on high alert, but he didn't fire. There was something different about this one. It moved again, taking a step closer. Kalen's grip tightened. The creature's movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. It didn't appear to be threatening, but its sheer presence was enough to make Kalen feel small and vulnerable. For a moment he wondered if he was just seeing things, if the stories about the Vulpine had been exaggerated, but he quickly shook the thought away. This was real. This was happening. Stay calm, Kalen muttered to himself, trying to steady his breath. He wasn't about to be caught off guard by some alien creature, no matter how strange it looked. He lifted his rifle higher, aiming it at the creature, though he hesitated to pull the trigger. His mind told him to shoot, to defend himself, but something in his gut told him this wasn't an ordinary encounter. The Vulpine stopped a few feet away from him, tilting its head once more. It seemed curious. Kalen's eyes narrowed. The stories didn't mention this. They didn't mention a Vulpine that was curious instead of aggressive. Was it trying to communicate with him? No, that couldn't be it. Aliens didn't just stop and stare at humans, did they? Stay back, Kalen said, his voice firm but laced with uncertainty. He stepped back, trying to keep his distance, but the Vulpine didn't move. It just watched him, its expression unreadable. There was no growl, no hiss, no sign of aggression. Kalen's heart raced. What was he supposed to do? What were the rules? Here, he had been trained for combat, for war, but not for this, not for the unknown. His breath hitched as the creature took another step forward, still watching him. It was like a puzzle that he couldn't quite solve, an enigma standing before him. Stay back, Kalen snapped, raising his rifle more urgently. The Vulpine's eyes flicked down to the weapon, then back up to Kalen's face. It blinked, as if assessing him in the same way Kalen was assessing it. But then, something strange happened. The creature lowered its head slightly, and in a soft, almost melodic voice, it spoke. Do not fear, it said, the words clear, though spoken in a language Kalen had never heard before. Kalen blinked. What? The Vulpine tilted its head again, this time with a small, almost imperceptible smile. We are not predators, not like you think. Kalen's mouth went dry. This was impossible. The stories had said nothing about Vulpine speaking. They were predators, wild animals. How could this thing be talking to him? It didn't make sense. The Vulpine took another small step forward, then paused. We do not wish to harm you. It, said the voice, calm and almost reassuring. Kalen's mind was spinning. Everything he thought he knew about this species was being shattered before his eyes. Who? What are you? Kalen stammered, his hands still gripping the rifle, but his finger no longer itching to fire. The Vulpine's gaze softened, almost, as if it understood his confusion. I am called Lyra, the creature replied. We watch, we learn, we understand, but we do not hunt for sport. We are not monsters. Kalen swallowed hard, feeling a mix of disbelief and something else. Could it be true? Could he have been wrong all along? Before he could respond, there was a rustle from behind him. Kalen turned his head, his heart racing again. Was there more of them? Lyra's ears perked up, and the Vulpine stepped forward with a quiet elegance. They come, Lyra said softly, but you need not be afraid. Kalen's breath caught in his throat as he turned around, still gripping his rifle tightly. The sound had come from behind him, something moving through the thick underbrush, something larger than the usual small creatures that inhabited the forest. He wasn't alone anymore. Lyra, the Vulpine, didn't seem alarmed. Instead, she turned with a calm, almost serene expression. Her sharp amber eyes flicked to Kalen's weapon for a brief moment, then back to the direction of the noise. They are not your enemies, she said, her voice still smooth and melodic, like a quiet whisper carried on the wind. They are of my kind, not here to harm. Kalen wasn't so sure. The forest was dense, the air thick with the scent of damp leaves and alien flowers, but the rustling behind him grew louder. It was coming closer, too close, too fast. His heart pounded in his chest, and his grip tightened on his rifle. What is that? He asked, his voice rough with tension. Lyra's expression softened, her long ears twitching slightly. She stepped forward, a graceful movement, almost as though she were dancing. We watch. We observe, she replied simply, her tone filled with quiet authority. We are not here to fight, Cadet. But your people have made assumptions about us. This forest, this planet is not yours to conquer, it is ours to protect. Kalen didn't know how to respond. His mind was still racing, and every part of him screamed to remain alert, to be ready for anything. But the way Lyra spoke, so sure of herself, it almost made him doubt everything he had been taught about the Vulpine. He swallowed hard and tried to steady his breathing. The rustling stopped. There was a long pause, and for a moment, Kalen could hear nothing but the distant hum of the alien wildlife and the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Then, from the shadows, they emerged. More Vulpine. At least 5 of them, tall, sleek, and covered in fur that shimmered in the dappled light filtering through the trees. They moved with purpose, their sharp eyes scanning the area as if they were always aware of everything around them. They didn't seem hostile. In fact, they seemed curious. Kalen took a step back, his rifle still in hand, but no longer raised. He was confused, unsure of what to do. These creatures, who he had been taught to fear and distrust, were now standing before him, looking more like sentient beings than mindless predators. One of the Vulpines stepped forward. Its fur was a deeper shade of red than the others, almost like the color of a setting sun. Its eyes locked onto Kalen's, and for a moment they just stared at each other. The creature's gaze wasn't cold or calculating. It was full of something else, something Kalen couldn't place. Lyra moved to stand beside him, her presence calming, almost like a shield. She addressed the new arrivals in their language, low and fluid, the words flowing like a gentle stream. Kalen couldn't understand a word, but the tone wasn't aggressive. It was almost welcoming. The red-furred Vulpine stepped closer, tilting its head. It seemed to assess Kalen as if it were trying to figure him out, just as he was trying to do the same with them. For several long moments there was nothing but silence. The air hung heavy with unspoken questions. Kalen found himself frozen, unable to look away. He wanted to ask them what they wanted, why they had come, but the words wouldn't come out. All he could do was stare, his heart still racing in his chest. Finally, the red-furred Vulpine spoke in a voice that was smooth yet rough at the edges. "You are not what we expected," it said, though it was clear it was speaking to Lyra, not Kalen. "We watched the humans from afar, but we did not know if you were the same as the stories told." Lyra nodded, her eyes shifting briefly to Kalen before returning to the Vulpine. "He is not like the others. He is not here to hunt, to conquer." The words felt strange to Kalen, and he couldn't help but glance at Lyra. "What do you mean?" he asked, finally finding his voice. "What stories? Why are you so different?" The Vulpine before him stepped forward again, its movements slow and deliberate. "Humans came to this world long ago," it said, its voice deep but not unfriendly. "At first we watched, curious. But then, we learned that your people fear what they do not understand. You saw us as nothing more than animals to be controlled, hunted. But we are not animals. We are people, just like you." Kalen's mind reeled. He had been trained to believe the Vulpine were nothing more than dangerous predators, creatures that attacked without warning. He had never considered the possibility that they might be more than that they might be as intelligent, as capable of thought as any human. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. "But the stories," the others said. "Others do not see the truth," Lyra interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "Others see what they wish to see. You are not the first human to come to our planet with weapons raised, but you may be the first to see us for what we truly are." Kalen swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in his stomach. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, the realization dawning that everything he had believed about the Vulpine was wrong. The stories, the myths, he had never questioned them. But now, standing here, face to face with these creatures, he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. For the first time since his arrival on Varelli's, Kalen wasn't afraid. He didn't feel threatened. He felt curious. He wanted to understand, to learn more. But the fear still lingered, buried deep within him, like a seed waiting to sprout. He looked around at the Vulpine, their amber eyes watching him carefully. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice steady, but still unsure. Lyra's expression softened. "We do not want war, Cadet. We do not want conflict. We want peace. But peace requires understanding. We want you to see us for what we are, not what you fear." Kalen's gaze dropped to the ground, his mind swirling with confusion. Peace. Understanding. These were not the words of predators, of monsters. They were the words of beings who wanted to coexist, who wanted to bridge the gap between their world and his. His mind began to shift, and for the first time he saw the Vulpine not as a threat but as equals. They were just like him, fighting for survival, for a future where they could live without fear. And that's when Kalen realized this wasn't just about the Vulpine. It was about him, too. About all humans. If they wanted to survive here, if they wanted to coexist with these creatures, they would have to see them for what they truly were. Not predators, but people. Kalen stood still as the Vulpine surrounding him exchanged quiet words in their language. His mind buzzed, his heart still racing. Every instinct in his body told him to be cautious, to trust his training. He had been taught to always keep his guard up, especially around unknown alien species. But here, in this forest with the Vulpine, the air felt different. Lyra, standing beside him, glanced over her shoulder. Her amber eyes caught his, and she gave him a small, reassuring nod. It was strange. He had expected fear, maybe even hostility. Yet all he felt was curiosity, a deep, insatiable desire to understand. The Vulpine were not what he had imagined. The red-furred Vulpine, who had spoken before, turned its gaze toward Kalen once again. Its face held an expression of thoughtfulness, and for a moment, Kalen could have sworn it almost smiled. "We have watched your people for a long time," the red-furred Vulpine said, its voice calm but heavy with years of wisdom. "We have seen the good and the bad, but we have never trusted you, not until now." Kalen blinked, feeling a rush of emotions. The Vulpine had been watching humans for years, and now, for the first time, they were letting him see who they truly were. He had always assumed the Vulpine were nothing but fierce, dangerous hunters driven by instinct. But there was more to them. Much more. Lyra spoke next, her voice gentle but firm. "We cannot live in the shadows forever. Our people are tired of hiding from those who misunderstand us. But it is not just you, Kalen. It is all of us. We must learn to live together, not as enemies, but as allies." Kalen felt a deep shift inside him. The words hit him harder than he expected. Allies. He had never once thought that the Vulpine might want peace, that they might want to work with humans instead of fighting them. He was used to the idea that humanity was always the superior force, the ones who controlled, the ones who took. But now, as he stood there side by side with Lyra and the others, he realized that the Vulpine weren't the ones who needed to change. It was him. What do you mean, allies?" Kalen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can we be allies after everything we've done?" Lyra's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to him. "You are not responsible for the actions of others, but you are here now. You have a choice. You can go back to your people and tell them the truth, or you can stay here with us and help us protect what is ours." The words echoed in Kalen's mind. He could feel the weight of their meaning, the gravity of the decision he had to make. He had always been taught to follow orders, to never question authority. But this felt different. The Vulpine weren't asking him to fight. They were asking him to help them protect their world, their way of life. I don't know what to say," Kalen admitted. "I came here to do my job, to follow orders, but what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, it's not what I expected." The red-furred Vulpine took a few steps toward Kalen, its eyes locked on him with an intensity that made him shiver. "What you expect doesn't matter. What matters is what you choose now. Will you help us? Will you stand with us?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, a moment of truth. Kalen felt his heart race again. He wasn't just standing on the edge of a decision. He was standing on the edge of a new reality. The Vulpine weren't the enemy. They were just like humans, fighting for survival, for a future. And suddenly, Kalen understood. He understood the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. It wasn't about control or power. It was about respect. The Vulpine respected their land, their world, and their way of life. And for the first time in his life, Kalen realized that true strength didn't come from conquering. It came from protecting what was worth protecting. He took a deep breath, looking into the eyes of the Vulpine and Lyra. The trust they had placed in him, the offer of peace, weighed heavily on him, and for the first time, he felt like he was truly making a choice, not as a soldier, but as a person. "I'll stay," Kalen said, his voice steady now. "I'll help. I'll fight for you. For this planet." Lyra smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips. "Then welcome, Kalen. Welcome to our world." The next few days passed in a blur. Kalen stayed with the Vulpine, learning from them, adapting to their ways. They weren't what he had expected at all. They weren't wild beasts or monsters. They were a proud, ancient people with knowledge far beyond his understanding. They had their own technology, their own ways of communicating, their own customs and traditions. The Vulpine didn't use violence as their first resort. They didn't hunt for sport. They used their skills to survive, to protect their people and their world. They were a society built on respect, for nature, for each other, and for their planet. Kalen spent most of his time with Lyra, who acted as both a guide and a mentor. She taught him about the planet, its resources, its history. The Vulpine had lived on Varellis for centuries, long before humans had ever arrived. They had watched the stars, seen other races come and go, but they had never allowed anyone to take what was theirs. They spoke often of their past, of the times when they had been hunted, of the battles they had fought to protect their homes. The Vulpine didn't forget, and neither did Kalen. Every word, every story they shared left an imprint on him. The Vulpine weren't just survivors. They were protectors, and they had been protecting their world long before Kalen's people had arrived. But as Kalen learned, there was still much to fear. The humans weren't the only threat to Varellis. Others, from far-flung galaxies, were already eyeing the planet, and the Vulpine were determined to stop them, no matter the cost. Kalen sat beside the flickering fire, the soft crackling of the wood the only sound that broke the deep silence of the Vulpine camp. It had been a few days since he had chosen to stay with them, and every day he learned something new. Lyra had become his guide through the dense jungle of Varellis and the complexities of Vulpine culture. But despite the tranquility of his surroundings, a sense of unease hung in the air. The Vulpine had spoken often of threats, of invasions, of outsiders who sought to take their world. It was clear that the planet was rich with resources that others coveted. The Vulpine's peace had always been fragile, their isolation their only shield. But that shield was now weakening. The peace he had found among them felt fragile too. As Kalen sat by the fire, the cool breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it a tension that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Lyra," Kalen said, breaking the silence. "You mentioned that others were watching this planet, that they were planning something. What did you mean by that?" Lyra, who had been sitting across from him, her amber eyes glowing softly in the firelight, didn't immediately answer. She looked up at the stars, her expression thoughtful. The Vulpine seemed to be always watching, always calculating. It was a part of them, this careful observance of everything around them. "They are coming," Lyra said at last, her voice low and serious. "The ones who seek to take what is not theirs. The human settlers on this planet are not the only ones who have been watching us. There are others, far worse than any human. They have ships, weapons, things that we cannot fight with what we have now." Kalen's stomach twisted with unease. He had heard of other alien factions, but he had never imagined them being so close, so real. His thoughts flashed to the stories he had heard back at the base, the ones about the ruthless alien factions who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. He had always seen them as distant threats, abstract, something to worry about later. But now, the threat was at his doorstep. "How soon?" Kalen asked, his voice tight with worry. Lyra met his gaze, her eyes calm but filled with a quiet determination. "Soon. Too soon. We have been watching them for months. They are close, and when they come, they will not hesitate. They will not show mercy." Kalen felt a wave of dread wash over him. The Vulpine were not just fighting to protect their land. They were fighting for their very survival. And as much as he had come to respect them, as much as he had come to see them as equals, Kalen knew they couldn't do it alone. "Then we need to act first," Kalen said, standing up abruptly. His heart raced, the adrenaline already starting to pulse through his veins. "We can't wait for them to strike first. We have to hit them before they do." Lyra stood too, her gaze unwavering. "And what do you propose?" "The Vulpine do not fight wars like humans do. We do not use guns or bombs. We fight with the land, with the trees, with what we know. But it is not enough against what is coming." Kalen's mind raced. He had trained for battles, for combat. He knew strategy. He knew how to fight. But this was different. The Vulpine didn't have the same tools, the same weapons. And yet, they had something far more valuable: knowledge of their world, of the land they had lived on for centuries. "Then we use what you have," Kalen said, the idea forming in his mind. "We use your knowledge. We fight with the forest, with the elements. If we can get your people organized, we can prepare. We can fight the way you fight, on your terms. You don't need the same weapons the humans have. We'll use the land. We'll outsmart them." Lyra regarded him for a long moment. Her sharp, calculating eyes studied him, as though trying to understand the human's boldness. Finally, she nodded. "Perhaps you are right. Perhaps we can use what we have. But this is not just a fight for the forest. This is a fight for our future." The weight of her words hung heavily between them. Kalen understood now. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the Vulpine's way of life. They had always lived in harmony with the land, never seeking to conquer, never seeking to expand. But now that peace was under threat. "You can count on me," Kalen said firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes to help you protect your home." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Kalen worked with the Vulpine to set up defenses, to plan for the coming invasion. It wasn't easy. The Vulpine didn't think like humans. They didn't rely on technology the way humans did. Instead, they relied on their connection to the land, their knowledge of the forest, the wildlife, the environment. These were their weapons. And with Kalen's guidance, they began to develop new strategies for defending their home. They set traps, using the natural resources around them. They learned to blend in with the environment, to use the jungle's dense foliage as cover. Kalen worked alongside the Vulpine, learning their methods and sharing his own. It was an uneasy partnership at first, but as the days passed, Kalen began to realize how much he had to learn from them. It was clear that the Vulpine had been surviving on their own for centuries. They had learned how to fight in a way that was in tune with their world, in a way that Kalen had never even considered. But he wasn't just learning from them. They were learning from him, too. The humans had their own way of thinking, their own way of fighting. And in this strange new alliance, Kalen saw the beginnings of something powerful. But even as they prepared, the looming threat grew closer. The scouts reported strange ships in the skies, moving closer and closer. The invaders were coming. Kalen stood with Lyra, looking up at the stars. "We won't let them take this place," he said quietly. "No," Lyra agreed. "We won't." And with that, the final preparations were made. They would stand together, human and Vulpine, and defend Virellis from those who sought to take it. The air was thick with anticipation. The Vulpine had prepared their land, their forest, and now it was time. Time to defend what they had lived and fought for. Time to stand against the invaders who threatened their very existence. Kalen had never been in a battle quite like this one. There were no traditional weapons, no armies marching on a battlefield. This battle would be fought on the Vulpine's terms, using the land, the creatures, and the elements as allies. Kalen stood at the edge of the dense jungle, looking out over the clearing where the first signs of the enemy were beginning to show. The sky had darkened as the strange ships hovered in the air, their sleek forms cutting through the clouds like dark shadows. They were still far away, but Kalen could feel their presence. The quiet hum of the ships in the distance was a reminder that the Vulpine's way of life was about to be challenged. Lyra stood beside him, her expression calm, but her eyes were full of the same determination that Kaelin had seen in her since the first time they spoke. She was ready. The Vulpine were ready, and so was he. "Are you sure about this?" Kaelin asked, his voice low. "We don't have much time. Once they land, there's no going back." Lyra nodded, her sharp eyes never leaving the sky. "We have the advantage of the land. They do not know this place as we do. The forest will protect us." Kaelin glanced at the forest around them. The Vulpine had already set traps, hidden in plain sight, camouflaged by the natural surroundings. They had created intricate systems using vines, rocks, and even the very trees themselves. The creatures of the forest had been enlisted as allies, their movements carefully coordinated with the Vulpine's plans. The invaders would not expect such an environment, so carefully woven into every element of the landscape. "They won't know what hit them," Kaelin muttered, more to himself than to Lyra. His heart was pounding, but there was a strange calm settling over him. Perhaps it was the Vulpine's quiet confidence, or maybe it was the trust he had placed in them, but for the first time, Kaelin felt like he was part of something bigger. As the ships began to descend, the first of the enemy soldiers began to spill out onto the ground. They were humanoid, with armor that shimmered under the low light of the setting sun. Their weapons were strange, long rifles with glowing energy cores, and they moved in formation, scanning the area with cold mechanical precision. But they were unprepared. They didn't know this world, and that was the Vulpine's greatest advantage. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just about protecting the planet anymore. It was about proving that the Vulpine were more than just stories, more than the predators people believed them to be. It was about showing that the strength of the land could hold its own against the most advanced technology. Lyra gave Kaelin a nod. She was ready. The Vulpine had planned for this moment for years. They had watched the sky for any sign of invaders, and now the moment had come. The battle began quietly at first. A few soldiers were pulled into the ground by hidden vines, disappearing into the underbrush before they could react. Another soldier, walking too close to a cluster of trees, was struck by a falling branch, sending him crashing to the ground. These were the subtle defenses of the land, the kind that Kaelin had learned about over the past few days. The Vulpine had made sure the forest was their ally, but soon the invaders adapted. They raised their rifles and fired into the trees, sending bursts of energy into the air. The Vulpine reacted swiftly, their sharp senses guiding them through the chaos. Kaelin could see the strategy now. The soldiers were trying to move in closer to take control of the clearing, but the Vulpine weren't giving an inch. Kaelin moved quickly, using the cover of the trees to his advantage. He wasn't a soldier, in the traditional sense anymore. He was an ally, fighting for something larger than himself. As he moved, he saw a group of Vulpine dart through the trees, their movements fluid and fast. They weren't running. They were luring the invaders into traps. Suddenly there was a loud crash followed by a series of explosions. The Vulpine had triggered a trap, using the very earth beneath their feet to turn the invaders' technology against them. The ground split open, sending the enemy soldiers tumbling into a pit filled with jagged rocks. The explosions were loud, but they were strategically placed to limit damage to the surrounding forest. It was a brilliant move, showing just how deeply the Vulpine understood their environment. Kaelin's heart raced as the sounds of the battle grew louder. The invaders were retreating, but Kaelin knew they wouldn't give up so easily. They had underestimated the Vulpine, but now they were regrouping. The battle had only just begun. Lyra appeared beside him, her face set in determination. "We cannot let them reach the heart of the forest," she said urgently. "If they do, they will destroy everything." Kaelin nodded. The heart of the forest was where the Vulpine had lived for generations. If the invaders made it there, they would tear apart the very core of the planet's spirit. The Vulpine's connection to the land ran deep, and Kaelin understood now just how sacred that connection was. Together, Kaelin and Lyra moved swiftly, navigating the forest to intercept the advancing enemy. The Vulpine worked in unison, creating a barrier between the invaders and the heart of their world. Kalen felt the weight of his responsibility growing heavier with each step. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight to protect a culture, a way of life that had existed for centuries. And now it was his fight too. As they approached the clearing where the heart of the forest lay, Kalen saw the invaders pushing forward. They were relentless, their technology far superior. But the Vulpine were faster, more agile. They were one with the land, and no amount of firepower could change that. The final confrontation would happen here, at the heart of the forest, where the Vulpine would stand their ground. Kalen tightened his grip on his rifle. He wasn't just protecting the forest anymore. He was protecting his friends, his new family. He was fighting for a future where both humans and Vulpine could live in peace. A future where they could stand together against those who sought to tear it all apart. The battle was far from over, but Kalen knew one thing for sure: he was ready. The sound of battle still echoed in the air, but it was changing. The hum of the invaders' energy rifles had grown quieter, and the once chaotic explosions from the Vulpine traps now seemed more like distant memories. It felt like the tides of the battle were turning. The invaders had underestimated the Vulpine, and now they were paying the price. But Kalen knew better than to relax. The war wasn't over yet. He stood beside Lyra, watching as the remaining invaders attempted to regroup. Their movements were slower now, more hesitant. The Vulpine were relentless, luring them into the forest's traps, using the environment itself to fight back. It was working. The invaders were beginning to retreat, their soldiers falling back into their ships, abandoning the fight. For a brief moment, Kalen allowed himself to breathe easier. But that didn't last long. A low rumble shook the ground beneath their feet, and Kalen felt the familiar pulse of fear rise in his chest. The invaders weren't done. They had a backup plan. He turned to Lyra, his eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" he asked urgently. Lyra's ears twitched and her sharp eyes narrowed. "It's too late to turn back. They're activating their last weapon." Before Kalen could respond, the ground shook again, this time much harder. The distant hum of energy. Weapons was replaced by the loud whirring sound of machines. Kalen looked up, his heart sinking as he saw the ships hovering closer to the trees. They were releasing something massive. The ships began to deploy large mechanical structures, towering machines that looked like walking war machines. Their limbs were massive, their heads designed with sharp angles and glowing lights. These machines were built to crush everything in their path. Kalen's mind raced. This was what they had been preparing for, the moment when the invaders stopped underestimating them. This was their final push. He looked at Lyra, who was already moving, leading the way back toward the Vulpine forces. "They've underestimated us for too long," Kalen muttered under his breath. "We can't let them destroy everything we've fought for." Lyra's eyes flashed with determination. "We won't, but we must fight smart. The land will protect us, but we need to make sure we use it properly." Kalen nodded. They had no more time to waste. They had to act before the invaders could deploy their machines deeper into the forest. He followed Lyra, running as quickly as he could, his breath sharp in his chest. The Vulpine were already preparing for the final assault. They had one chance to stop these machines and push back the invaders once and for all. The Vulpine leader, the red-furred warrior who had spoken to Kalen earlier, appeared before him. "We need to make sure they don't reach the heart of the forest," the Vulpine said urgently. "If they destroy it, we lose everything." Kalen's mind raced. The heart of the forest was where the Vulpine had their deepest connection to the land. If it was destroyed, their people would be left with nothing. The trees, the land, everything they had fought for would be gone. "I'll do whatever it takes," Kalen said firmly. "What's the plan?" The red-furred Vulpine looked at him, his expression unreadable. "We have a final trap. It will take all of us. But if we do it right, we can take down their machines before they can get any further." Kalen glanced around. The Vulpine were positioning themselves, setting up more traps. This wasn't going to be easy. The machines were large, powerful, and heavily armored. They had advanced technology that the Vulpine didn't have. But the Vulpine knew their land. They had the advantage of the forest, and Kalen was more determined than ever to see it through. "We'll need a distraction," Kalen said, his mind working quickly. "If we draw their attention away from the heart of the forest, we can take them out before they even get close." Lyra was already moving, coordinating with the other Vulpine. They had no time to waste. The invaders' machines were getting closer, their movements slow but deliberate. The war machines were armed with enormous energy cannons designed to rip through the thick forest and flatten anything in their path. Kalen felt a surge of adrenaline as he joined the Vulpine. The traps were already set, hidden beneath the layers of leaves and branches. The Vulpine worked like a well-oiled machine, their swift movements synchronizing perfectly with the natural world. They were ready. The first war machine broke through the trees, its massive limbs crushing everything in their path. The sound of metal scraping against rock echoed through the forest, and Kalen's heart pounded in his chest. The machine was close. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. "Now!" Kalen shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise of the machine. A blast of energy erupted from the ground. The earth itself seemed to split open as massive vines shot out of the ground, wrapping around the legs of the war machine. The machine's legs buckled under the pressure, and it fell with a deafening crash. The Vulpine were using the very land to fight back. Kalen had never seen anything like it. The battle had begun in earnest. The Vulpine launched from the trees, moving with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. They used the environment, the trees, the rocks, and the vines, all to their advantage. Kalen fought alongside them, doing his part to ensure that the invaders didn't get any closer to the heart of the forest. For hours, the battle raged on. The machines were powerful, but the Vulpine were faster. They fought like the forest itself, using the land's natural power to destroy the invaders' technology. The war machines fell one by one, crushed under the weight of the earth or tangled in the forest's thick vines. When the last of the machines fell, there was a long, eerie silence. Kalen stood in the midst of the battlefield, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The invaders had been pushed back, their machines destroyed, and their forces scattered. But the cost had been high. The Vulpine gathered around, their faces grim but filled with quiet pride. They had won, but at what cost? The forest was scarred, the trees broken and burned in places. The land had taken a heavy toll, but it wasn't over. The Vulpine had shown the invaders what they were capable of. They had fought for their future, and for the future of Virelli's. Kalen stood at the edge of the clearing, looking out over the land that had been defended. He knew the fight wasn't truly over. The invaders would come again. But now there was hope. They had proven that the Vulpine were not to be underestimated. They had a chance, and Kalen, he had found a new home, a new purpose, and he would fight to protect it, no matter what came next.